All right. Well, welcome everyone to Book Nation by Jen's book club. We're so happy to have you here as always. We're thrilled to have Fiona Davis with us tonight. Fun little story. Fiona Davis was our very first guest author that we had when we first started our book club with the dance class that we do. We did it. There was like 6 or 7 of us sitting around the couch with Fiona on the coffee table on the computer.
Right, it was before Zoom, so I think we did it on FaceTime.
Exactly. And so look at us now with this big group and how far we've come. We're thrilled to be able to welcome Fiona Davis back with us to discuss her really wonderful, interesting, suspenseful, exciting novel, The Spectacular. Just a few housekeeping notes. We do love for you to engage with us in the chat. If you have questions, please feel free to drop them in there. I will disappear once we get the discussion started, and you'll see my face pop in on occasion to bring in a question for Fiona and Jen to sort of bring in. I do curate a little bit, so if some of you start to have the same general questions, that's when I'll start to pop in, or when it's sort of apropos to what's been going on in the conversation as it is. As you know, we are recording. And I think that's it. I think that we're ready to get started. So I hand it over to my wonderful friend, Jen Blankfein.
Great. Thank you so much, Louisa, and welcome everyone. I think what we'll do is I'm going to start with reading Fiona's bio to you, and then we'll get moving. So Fiona Davis is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 historical fiction novels set in iconic New York City buildings, including The Spectacular, The Magnolia Palace, The Address, and The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which was a Good Morning America book club pick. Her novels have been chosen as One Book, One Community Reads, and her articles have appeared in publications like the Wall Street Journal and O, the Oprah magazine. She first came to New York as an actress, but fell in love with writing after getting a master's degree at Columbia Journalism School. Her books have been translated into over 20 languages, and she's based in New York City. So a little bit of our history is that when Fiona published her first novel, The Dollhouse, in, I think it was August of 2016, her first book event was at the Westport Library, which is my library, and I happened to be there. And so we met for the first time, and we actually took a photo together to save that moment, which is very funny because it was a long time ago now. And we look much better now than we did then. And it was also before Book Nation started. So that was kind of the beginning of everything for me, and it was the very beginning of everything writing related for Fiona. So that's kind of fun. And at that time, The Dollhouse was the book, and it was set in the Barbizon Hotel in New York City. And my mother actually lived in the Barbizon Hotel. And so that was a fun thing to talk about at the time. And my mother and Fiona had a little Facebook chat about that as well. So that was exciting. And so now here we are 7 years later, 7 books later, and Fiona is now a household name, and her books have entertained and educated us on New York City landmarks and so much history. And so it's pretty exciting to have her here with us. So welcome, Fiona, to Book Nation Book Club tonight.
Thank you, Jen. And thanks everybody for coming today. What a great introduction. I remember that night so clearly because it was the first time I'd ever done a book talk. I didn't do much public speaking before then, and my knees were knocking under that, where I was standing there. I was so nervous. I had a couple glasses of wine before I started and just got through it. And it's amazing that was 7 years ago. That's just incredible. I love that we share that moment.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, I thought you were great then, and you were just starting. So, so much has happened since then. And now you're seasoned as a speaker because you've had to go on the road so many times. So it's a whole different ballgame, but it's exciting to be here with you after all of that as well. So
It's so great. And I think what else, what it was, you show up to your first book event and you figure there might be 2 people there and you're hoping there might be 3 instead. And I think it was a really nice crowd. And I remember just being so shocked that they weren't all my relatives.
right.
These were actual people who came to hear about the book, which was just incredible. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And now you draw a nice crowd wherever you go. So it's great. And you also have a lot of contact with your readers on a more personal level, which maybe we'll talk about a little later, but that is unusual and maybe not something you expected.
Yeah, it was kind of a fun, the way that readers engage on social media has just been such a gift because, they engage with each other with this book because it's about Rockettes. I've had Rockettes find each other on my social media, that I knew you, we danced together. And that's just a wonderful way to bring people together. And readers are just the best people, readers, librarians, booksellers, they're the best.
Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. It's not something you might expect when you're going into this. Writing is so personal. And then when you share it with people and they respond in this way, I imagine it really makes you feel like what you're doing is worth it.
It's true. And you're right, because it is so solitary. You spend so much time alone. And then to suddenly go out in the world and hear people's reactions, it's incredible. It's so much fun. And there's been just a wonderful response from the spectacular.
Yeah. So, okay, let's start with New York City. Why, what perked your interest to start writing about New York City and the landmarks just in general from the very beginning?
Yeah, I came to the city right after college, and I've been here ever since. So that's 35 something years. And I love the history of the old buildings here and how, there's all these generations of stories that are hidden within them. And that there's this, you can go by one building and realize, wow, thousands of people lived there. And the people who lived there in the 1860s had a completely different experience from the people who lived there in the 1960s or today. And so, to be able to do research and find out who these people were and then create use that as a structure to create a fictional story and fictional characters is really fun. It just, my creativity just explodes whenever I'm trying to do research on a new book. And I think I just love old buildings and I love to snoop around them. I would love it if everybody left New York and I could just go explore everywhere, and go into these fabulous, Gilded Age mansions or, a tenement on the Lower East Side and just see what it's like.
Yeah, it's true. There's so much hidden history, and it's great for the reader, for us to be able to learn about it, as you are choosing these different locations and talking about it. It's really fun to read about too. So I love it. All right, can you give us just a brief synopsis of the spectacular so we have a starting point here?
Sure. So it takes place in the 1950s, and it's from the point of view of a Rockette named Marion. And she goes against her father's wishes to audition and become a Rockette, which really throws her into a whole new world where she has to be very independent and take care of herself because her father basically says, okay, that's it. And as this is going on, there's a guy named the Big Apple Bomber who's been setting bombs all over New York in iconic New York City buildings, which is based on a real bomber. And because one goes off in Radio City for very personal reasons, Marion gets drawn into the hunt for this bomber. And she reaches out to a psychiatrist named Peter, who's very introverted and yet very brilliant. And they team up together to try and figure out who's been setting these bombs. And it's a mix of historical fiction. There's a lot of glamour of that backstage goings on at Radio City Music Hall, what it's like to be a Rockette, and a touch of thriller thrown in there as well.
Yeah, which was a little new for you, the thriller part of it. So that it was really great. What were the shows like at Radio City in the 50s?
Yeah, it was very different from today. So today we know it as a really concert venue. You go there, you see bands or comedians. And back then it was a movie palace, and they showed 4 movies a day. And they also had a stage show that went along with it. So if you bought a ticket to the movie, you could stay and watch the stage show. And that was the Rockettes. There was a choral ensemble. Sometimes they'd have a juggler. And the Rockettes would do numbers that had to do with the theme of the movie. So if it was a John Wayne movie, they'd be in cowboy outfits. And so their shows changed depending on what movie was coming in, how long it lasted. And it was an incredibly difficult job, because today the Rockettes are just seasonal. They only do the Christmas spectacular, which is 2 to 5 shows a day. So it's not easy. But back then they did 4 shows a day for 3 or 4 weeks straight before they got a week off. And then they'd start all over again. And so it took such technical skill, it took strength. You really had to be in the right mindset to have to do this over and over again, and then learn new routines on top of that while you're doing the old one, and then have a big premiere where you'd show up at 5 a.m. and not get home until, midnight. So it was a heck of a job. And the women who did it back in the, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s really had to be at the top of their game.
It seems like it was even a more difficult job back then than it is now. But Radio City is so magical even now. I know for me, maybe 15 years ago or so, one of my sons had a friend who was an actor who was the young boy in the spectacular, and it was for the 75th anniversary year. So we went to see the Rockettes, and it was so magical and so great to see those dancers. But even just being in the building, I was there this summer, of course, to see Barry Manilow, which was a different kind of magical, but still magical.
Oh, Mandy, yeah.
So it's such a great place, such a great building.
It is. And what was fun was learning about what it was like in the 50s, because there were so many people there all the time. They had a dormitory for the Rockettes so they could sleep over if they needed to. There was a cafeteria, there was a wig and hat department and a shoe department and a lounge. A nurse was on staff. And then they had wiffle ball and shuffleball courts up on the roof, which really delighted the workers in the skyscrapers nearby.
Wow. So it was sort of like a world of its own. Everything, all the people in there had their own little town almost.
Yeah, that really supported the whole infrastructure. It really was a city, for sure.
Amazing. So let's talk about Marion. Marion, she goes against the grain and really wants to pursue this dancing career, and she's being brave and going against what her father thinks. And I feel like most of the readers are rooting for her. She's our hero. Is Marion based on anybody specific?
Yeah, as I was doing my research, I learned about a woman named Vera Ellen, and she was a very famous movie star in the 40s, 50s. And she was in White Christmas, was one of the biggest ones. And it turned out that she'd been a Rockette when she was very young. She was one of the youngest Rockettes. But she had a really tough time because she couldn't fit in. She was just bigger, larger than life. If Russell Markert, who founded the Rockettes, wanted a kick that was, shoulder high, hers would be eye height. She just was bigger than anything. And I thought that was so fascinating, that this woman was just so big that she eventually quit before she got fired, and then went on to a really fantastic career. And I thought that was interesting. And it kind of brings up the theme that the novel explores, which is, what is the cost of suppressing your own creativity or your own individuality for the good of the greater whole? And that's whether you're a precision dancer, whether you work for a corporation, whether you're in a community, when do you work as a team? And then when do you have to stop and make your own voice heard? And so that was an interesting way to kind of bring that into the book and explore that idea.
Yeah. And then she had a sister who was kind of the opposite and didn't want to, pursue anything that was as individual. She was more traditional. Were more people like that back then, like Judy?
Yeah. So Judy, the father, he explains that they can be either a secretary or a teacher or a mom, of course, or maybe a nurse. And that was what you were limited to back then. You didn't become an executive. You went to secretarial school. And so for Judy, as a contrast, I wanted her to be very, her father's favorite. She very much wants to stay in his graces. She, in fact, works for him at the corporation that they work at. And that would be more typical. And so as I researched this and interviewed Rockettes who danced in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they talked about how their fathers did not approve. They really had to beg, their parents to be allowed to do it. And then once they did it, they were living in the middle of this amazing city, making their own money, independent. I remember when I asked her, what's your favorite memory of being a Rockette? And she said it was walking down the middle of Fifth Avenue in the middle of the night, arm in arm with her fellow Rockettes, just singing at the top of their lungs. And that was something women didn't do, And so it was just marvelous to hear this. And I thought, what a wonderful feeling to try and capture in a book and to show how things have changed, right? We're allowed these days to do what we want. But back then, you couldn't even open a checking account or have a credit card unless a man was co-signed with you.
Right. And so when you were writing Simon's character, I'm guessing you always knew that he was going to be against what Marion was choosing to do. That was the conflict in there.
Yeah, because so many Rockettes spoke of that I thought this is something that, is clearly happening. It's not like I'm making it up. It's not, a stretch to say that your father would disapprove that you're dancing on stage and, not under you're not being taken care of by anyone.
Right.
And
Now,
that would worry them. Mm-hmm.
Marion's mother, Simon's wife, her story was interesting. Tell us about her story, and when did you come up with what her backstory was going to be?
Yeah, her story changed over the course of writing it. I knew I wanted her to not be alive. I wanted her to be kind of this treasure that's kept in Marion's heart. And then I wanted her to realize over the course of the book what her mother went through and what her struggles were and how that mirrors her own. And that, you can't think of your mother as either a saint or a devil, that they were just people living their lives, doing the best they could. And so the mom really wanted to be an actress, and Marion stumbles upon this in the attic and realizes she wants to pursue her own career as well. And then she's told things by her father that aren't necessarily correct, which makes her turn against her mom. And I wanted that journey to be like that, like this roller coaster for her, so that she can come to, at the end, hopefully feeling centered about who her mom was and how that reflects on her and what her own life should be, so that she doesn't turn into her mom.
Yeah, I really liked that part about her mom. I felt that was a good, just background information. I liked that a lot. All right, let's talk about Peter. So Peter, he's a stand-up guy. He makes some decisions, though, that he thinks are best for him and for Marion that maybe were not, maybe were, maybe were not. Did you always know that you would get them reconnected in the end?
I did. I knew that there would be enough shocks in this book, for example, what happens to Judy, that I needed to have some kind of positive closure at the end. But I knew at the same time, I didn't want it to be just a standard happy ending if they go off into the future. They needed to have they needed to have battle scars when they came back together, so that they were equals on a different level and in a different time. And they both achieved some wonderful things, and they could kind of move forward together. And I think they do live happily ever after, but I wanted it to be a tough ending that way. And I love reunification scenes. Shakespeare does them so well. You go see a Shakespeare play and you're just weeping in the fifth act. And that's just something I wanted to see if I could, kind of play around with.
Yeah, I loved that too. I mean, of course, you want them to get back together. You want them to see each other. And then the suspense leading up to it, where you feel like it might happen. It might happen. It's a great way to move the novel along.
Yes.
It was exciting. I loved it. The Creedmoor Hospital, is that a real place? And did you go there? Is it still here?
Yeah, I did not go, but it is still here, Creedmoor State Hospital. I don't think it's called that anymore. It's in Queens. And yeah, it was this very fabled hospital for the mentally ill. And back in, before the 50s, they had things like a theater troupe and gardens, and it was a place where people could go and be taken care of and get well. And then medication was invented that really basically just zombied everybody out. And they found that was easier. And so that's what I didn't know that. That was a surprise to me. And so I wanted to try and include that in the book. And the actual guy who really, the character of Peter is based on a guy named James Brussel, was a psychiatrist at Creedmoor and actually lived on the grounds with his wife. And so that's kind of where I found that. And he was a very different man from Peter. Peter's much younger. And so but I wanted to have him have a similar journey of figuring out who this bomber is, and, using all his skills to try and figure it out. And because I just thought it was so fantastic that this was really the first case of criminal profiling. I was shocked. And
So you found that out in research, that it really was the first case?
Yeah, it was amazing. So what happened was, just like in the book, the bomber had, bombed over 16 years. He hadn't killed anyone, but he'd injured 15 people, 2 very seriously. He'd hit Radio City twice, which is what made me think this has to be in the book, when I heard that. And, in all my books, I like to have something that happens exterior to the building so I can really anchor the story in it. And so the Mad Bomber seemed to be a good idea, even though the thought of doing something, a thriller, seemed, kind of crazy, but also really challenging. And so, yeah, this guy, James Brussel, the police came to him and he looked at all the letters and he came up with the profile that was, a man 40 to 50, living with an older female relative. He'll be clean shaven, very methodical. He'll be from Eastern Europe. He'll be Roman Catholic. And he said, when you find him, he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit and it will be buttoned. And he was absolutely right. And so from there, he went on and helped the FBI and started really to launch the art and science of criminal profiling. And so, yeah, I knew I had to include that in the book. And I tried to make it very clear in the author's note what's fiction and what's fact, because I know historical fiction readers especially want to know. And then there was a great book called Incendiary that was all about the Mad Bomber, as he was known. And that helped a lot. And I highly recommend, if you want to read more, it's a great read. It's really gripping.
I was talking about the Mad Bomber with a few of my friends a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that they grew up in Waterbury, Connecticut, and they knew all about the bomber growing up. He was like the creepy neighbor that people talked about, and they knew where he lived and they knew which house, and they would like worry about it and think about it. It was really part of their growing up.
That's incredible. Yeah. I've driven by Waterbury on 84 all the time. And now I go by it with a whole different way. I'm because I know the house still stands. And yeah, that's incredible. What's interesting is when I talk to New Yorkers who were around in the 40s, 50s, a lot of them had forgotten or didn't know about the Mad Bomber. I think he struck pretty, sporadically, that people would forget. But I was doing an author talk just a week ago, and a woman raised her hand and she said, yeah, we lived in Queens during that time. And when you went to a movie theater, you'd feel your seat to make sure there was no rip in it. And wow. I thought, oh, can you imagine? That would just, how terrifying.
That really is. So interesting, though. Probably, back then people didn't know about it because we didn't have the media that we have now. So if the word doesn't get around, or it's slow to get around, it just doesn't seem as relevant. Whereas now, if something happens, we know about it within seconds. So
right, you have to get the morning paper and read about it. Yeah,
that's right. Crazy. Well, that was definitely a good little tidbit of history that I think a lot of your readers didn't know about. So Google is getting overtime with people diving deep, on that one.
And it really came when I was looking for, okay, what else happened in the 50s, knowing that I wanted to set the book then. And I read that, in 1956, the police were ramping up their hunt for the Mad Bomber in New York City. And I thought, what? And then went down that rabbit hole, and I just couldn't believe it. I thought this is perfect for a book. And then I thought, how cool to have a chase scene through Radio City. And it just started to build from there.
I have a question about that and the whole thriller part about it. You've never written any thriller before. So how did you go about doing that? And did you have any help or inspiration?
My boyfriend is a thriller writer, so that definitely helped. I read more thrillers than I normally would, but a thriller is really just a ramped up mystery.
Right.
And you want plot twists, and you want the tension, you want everything that you want in a mystery. And I love that in a book. So all my books have some kind of mystery that has to be solved. It has plot twists, it has something to keep the reader turning the pages. And so the thriller to me was just that, but heightened. So it's
Right.
life or death. And which was really fun to do. But you have to be so careful when you're, describing like fight scenes. That was new of, okay, whose arm is doing what, and how is he trying to strangle her, and how can she reach behind? That's a whole new way of thinking that you have to kind of think in your head, and also sometimes do physically to see if it's possible.
Right. It's good though. And for you as a writer, it broadens your horizons of what you can, the kinds of stories that you can tell.
Exactly. And I don't want to write the same book over and over. And luckily the way I do it, because it's a building, I can pick the characters, the time period. I have so much freedom in the story as long as it's in a building, which I love, because I love that research part of it. That it's, to me, it's a joy to kind of try different things in each book and try different structures. And maybe this one has more of a single timeline than, the back and forth. And so that was one of the reasons I decided to really make it in 56, 57 here, so that I could focus on her story.
Yeah, I really liked that about this book too, because it allows for the buildup to happen, in real time without getting distracted by a different timeline. So, as your anxiety gets worked up, you're really moving ahead quickly, and it gives you that thriller kind of read, which is nice and it's different.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, what about Bunny? So Bunny, she represents freedom to Marion. She encourages her to shoot for the stars and do everything. She's having this affair with a married man. Was Bunny the kind of person that was common back then, or what did she represent? What was she?
Yeah. Talking to all these Rockettes, they really talked about what a wonderful sisterhood it was. And they talk, I'd say, well, what about backstabbing? Was there any backstage, shenanigans? And they'd say, no, people were really supportive. They were so happy to be where they were. It was just a really warm, safe environment for them. And that's kudos to Russell Markert, who was the founder and director. He really took care of them and made sure they were okay. But there were a couple Rockettes who mentioned, there were a couple Rockettes who had kind of patrons, or they were maybe with married men, which made me think, and not many, keep in mind. But it made me think, as the author, you're thinking, ooh, what's something kind of that I can pull into the story that's out of the norm? Because you can't have a book filled with normal, everyday people. It's just not that fun. And
it's fun to have a little scandal, right?
Yeah, it's fun to have a little scandal and obstacles that are in people's way. And so she adores Bunny, but at the same time, she disagrees with the way Bunny's going about her life, and worries that her father's right. Is she falling into these women who might be very bad, just take her down a path that she shouldn't be down. It shouldn't be going down. And so that's where Bunny comes in. But I wanted people to like her. I wanted her to be a good friend, just a little misguided and young and making stupid mistakes. And I love the fact that in the end, she's happy and doing fine. She doesn't get punished for what she did. She was just trying her best.
Right. So, and she did a good thing by introducing Marion to the rehearsal club, which was great for Marion to have this place to stay. How did the rehearsal club compare to the Barbizon Hotel or to the Chelsea Hotel?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of the Rockettes stayed there because it was so close to Radio City. And I thought, oh, that's fascinating, because it was really kind of a double brownstone. So it wasn't as big as the Chelsea Hotel or the Barbizon. It was much smaller, only I think 5 stories. So it wasn't packed with girls. It was, you had to get in and you had to, be in the performing arts, either auditioning or rehearsing or pursuing a career in some way. And so it was more intimate. And if you want to watch the movie Stage Door, if you haven't seen it, with Katharine Hepburn and Ginger Rogers, that takes place basically at the rehearsal club. It's based on it. And it's really a fun movie to watch, is, all these women and just the idea of the lobby being filled with people who are overacting or singing, or, the phone constantly ringing with the men calling to, for dates. It just was so much fun to write about. And I read that Carol Burnett had lived there. And if you listen to the podcast that Julia Louis-Dreyfus does, she has an interview with Carol Burnett where she talks about how wonderful it was when she was new to New York and staying there, and she didn't have an agent and she didn't know what to do. And so she and her friends from the rehearsal club put on a play in the rehearsal club, and they invited all the agents that they knew. And that's how she got her representation, was just by doing a play in, the parlor of the rehearsal club. And so I just thought that was too fun to pass up.
That's amazing. Could you imagine having Carol Burnett as your neighbor, like in New York?
Your roommate? Wouldn't that be hilarious?
That's incredible. Keep
If
away from the curtains. Right?
Yeah, I know, totally. When if you Google it, Carol Burnett and Rehearsal Club, you can find there's this great photo of her like jumping up and down on a bed, if she's like in midair and just looking goofy.
I could picture that completely. So much fun. Wow. All right. You talked a little bit before about Russell Markert, but can you tell us more about him and how he got to have this job of taking care of all these young girls?
Yeah, the Rockettes were his idea. In 1925 in St. Louis, Missouri, he formed the Missouri Rockettes. He wanted to create a precision dance troupe, and they became really popular, and they came to Broadway. And then they were kind of taken in by a big producer named Roxy Rothafel, who was part of the creation of Radio City Music Hall. And so then they became called the Roxyettes. And then eventually they became kind of the house, dance troupe for Radio City. And that's when they became the Rockettes. And Russell was there through the whole thing. And from 1925 until he retired in 1971, he was the choreographer and director of the Rockettes. And again, just very much beloved.
Wow. And so when you met the Rockette, some of these Rockettes, did they told you about him? Is that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, they talked about, what it was like to audition in front of him. And, they talked about how her father died. And so he walked her down the aisle when she got married. If there were problems with a roommate, he would help out and, find them a new apartment or whatever he could do. He just was very accessible, but firm. He knew what he wanted. And you had to obey the rules. You couldn't change your hair. You couldn't get a suntan or a sunburn. You couldn't gain or lose weight. You had to be, the height requirement was it's so funny, when it started in 1925, the height requirement was 5'2" to 5'6.5". And today it's 5'5" to 5'10.5", which just shows how things have changed, right?
We grew, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was the Rockettes, they had such great stories, and so many of what they told me made it into the book, because when I'm talking to them, I'm looking for those tidbits that really make a scene feel real and rooted to the time period and to what was going on. So they talk about how, one conductor at the last show of the night, he would speed up so that he could make his train home. And so they'd have to dance faster and faster and faster. And they talked about how, those pants that they wear for the toy soldiers in the 40s and 50s, they were so starched that you'd have to stand on a chair and slide into them. And it's just those details that are so much fun. And I have to just give a shout out to a woman named Sandy, who was the first Rockette who reached out to me, who gave me the idea. And she reached out through email and said, I'm a former Rockette, and if you want to know all the secrets about Radio City, you should call me. So of course I did. And we had this great conversation. And she, her husband actually worked the lighting board. They met there when they were both 19, and they've been married ever since. She's in her mid-80s now. And so when I had technical questions, I went to her husband, Bob, and was like, okay, backstage, where was the catwalk? What floor? How would you get here to there? And he came up with this whole, floor plan that he sent me. And she sent me all these programs and photographs and schedules. And that's really what helped make the book, because I knew I had a resource I could go to.
It's pretty incredible that she had this idea to email you. She had no idea that it would end up being a book. And I had heard somewhere that you had given her the opportunity to sign books too.
Yeah, what happened was the very first after the book launch was down in New Jersey, and she's lives there now. And so she and her husband and her son came to the book launch, and they sat in the front row and answer questions. And then at the end, I was signing books, and I looked up, and the bookseller had set up a table for her, and she was signing away. She had much better handwriting than mine did. And so people would come to mine and get signed, and then they go to Sandy's. I wish I could take her to every talk and every time I talk about the book, because it adds so much to it to hear her point of view.
Yeah, it's really incredible that all of that happened. Now, when you interview all of these Rockettes, do you record the conversations or do you take notes? How do you do that?
I take notes. I type really fast. I think that's why I write books quickly, because I can type as quickly as I can think. And so I will interview them and type it out, and then follow up with if I have questions. And so I talked to about probably 8 or 10 Rockettes in the course of the book who mainly danced there a long time ago. So they are in their 70s or 80s. And then I talked to some who are current Rockettes just to find out more about the technique. I talked to a ballet dancer. I didn't know much about dance. That's not my forte at all. And that was one of the reasons I was very intimidated about writing this book. But, once I got started, I realized I could turn to people and find experts who would help me.
Right. It's a long process.
It is. Yeah. It's about 3 or 4 months of serious research. And I'm usually panicked at that state because I, don't know if it will work as a book. And then I do a pretty quick first draft. And then it's about 10 different revisions before it's ready to go to my agent and then my editor.
And how long does the writing, when you start the first draft to having it go to the editor, how long does it take?
It's about 1.5 years total for the whole thing. So about 1 year and 3 months, probably 3 to 4 for the first draft, and then the rest for all the revisions.
So the second you finish one book, like now you're on tour or talking about the Spectacular, you must be working on another book already. Like you always have 2 things going on in your head, right? Yeah.
It's a little tricky because, I turned in the book to my editor 6 months before the pub date, which was June. So I turned it in, I think, November even of last year. And so since then, it's off to her, and I'll get edits back and have to look at it, but it's mainly in the publisher's hands. And so at that point, I start wondering what next building there could be. And I don't have a file of buildings. I don't have a list. I just wait and see what hits me. And that was exactly when Sandy reached out to me. So I felt like it was meant to be.
Well, I'm sure your readers all have a list, right? I mean, you get responses from everybody like, oh, you should write about this building and this building.
Yeah.
So, if you ever need ideas, you just have to say the word. I'm sure you could have 100 in a second.
And I've followed them in the past with the New York Public Library I wrote about for the Lions of Fifth Avenue, because so many readers mentioned it when I was doing book talks. And so that definitely pointed me in that direction.
Wow. That's fun. It's nice because it kind of gives you something to ground your stories on, and you can, all the creativity comes from you, but to have that one building gives you the structure, or gives you, something to dig your toe in.
Yes.
Which is nice.
Yeah, it's great. You know what? I feel like I do the all the research, and that gives me like a framework that then I can wrap a fictional story and characters around. And that's the way I kind of see it, is that I take a lot of things straight from history, but then, play around with it to make a really fun story.
Have you found that it's easier now than compared to when you wrote The Dollhouse?
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know on that first book. And so now as I'm writing, I think I'm quicker to fix things. I might see it on the page and be able to fix it quickly. Whereas back then, I needed an editor to point it out to me, or my agent. And, let's get deeper here. And now as I write, I hear their voices in my head. And so I think, okay, yep, this part, I'm going to have to play around with this some more. And so that does make it a little quicker, but it's never easier. There's always a point about 3/4 of the way through the book, the first draft, where I just think, oh, I can't go on. It's too much. Who will read this? It's so boring. And I just have to remind myself, that you have to push through and finish it. And I think that's true for anything. If you write poetry, if you're a dancer, if anything you do that's creative, a painter, there's a point that you just get tired and it feels impossible. But if you do push through that and complete it, it changes everything. It's about it, to have that stickiness, to stick with it and go through it, even when it's uncomfortable, knowing that everything you do will be uncomfortable. You'll hit that. It's never just an easy stretch. And once you get used to it, you just become used to, oh, right, I'm 75% through. This is why I feel like this. And then I just have a glass of wine at night or two.
And that helps you get through it for sure. All right. So towards the end of the book, Simon, you share, has Parkinson's. And you talk about the progression of his disease in the book, and you give us a little bit of medical information about Parkinson's as well. What inspired you to include that?
Yeah, when I was when in 2020, right, when we were all in lockdown and I was promoting Lions of Fifth Avenue on Zoom, I noticed that my arm would shake. And I kind of ignored it because it's not like you're out and about, no one could see it. And then finally, I went to a doctor who sent me to a neurologist, who sent me to a movement disorder specialist. And they said, oh, you have Parkinson's. And that was the day after I learned that the Lions of Fifth Avenue had hit the New York Times bestseller list. So it was quite the up and down.
Yeah.
And it's only a tremor, which is great because there's a real bag of goodies you can get with Parkinson's. There's a lot of different symptoms and issues that you can have. And a tremor is right now very controllable with medication. And a lot of people I talk to who have it, when I got it, I just went into research mode and I started, interviewing people. All right, what do you do? And looking at studies and talking to doctors and the Michael J. Fox Association is incredible as a resource. And I noticed the people I talked to said, I don't tell anyone, because I don't want to see mold or I don't want to lose my job, which are very valid reasons. And I just thought, it reminded me of breast cancer 30 or 40 years ago where no one spoke of it. And now, of course, it's a cause and there's money for research because people aren't afraid to say they have it. And so I just thought, the more people who talk about it, the better. And okay, this is what it looks like. And I'm doing really well. And so that in a way that, it can free people up. And so as I've been talking about it on tour, it's been amazing. People have come up to me and, whispered that they have it or, said, yes, I have it. I've had it for 18 years. I'm doing great, or that a parent passed away from it. And just getting those stories out, because I think that's why I included a character with it in the book, in fact, too, because I wanted to share what it's like when you're kind of hit with something out of the blue that you did not expect. And kind of explore what that's about. And to me, it was really incredible to think, okay, if I'm creating this character who's a dancer, her life is about her physical body and being in control of it. And when you're not, how does that affect a dancer? Like, never mind me, who, as long as I can type or dictate, I'll be fine. But for a dancer, what's that like? And so I was able to speak with a dancer with Parkinson's who's now very active in the Parkinson's community. And it was just so inspiring and so moving that I thought it'd be great to pepper this in the book so that people can see, what it's about.
So were you diagnosed while you were writing this? No, you were diagnosed before. So you had already done all the research, which you didn't want to let it go to waste anyway. You might as well include it.
Right. And knowing that Parkinson's back then was very different. Back then you were told, don't exercise because you might fall. And these days it's, all about do hard exercise because that's one of the only things that will slow the progression. And so it's a very active treatment.
Right. Well, and now with the Michael J. Fox movie still, where he really gets right into it, and you can see, all of the work that he does to try and keep himself going.
It's an incredible documentary. I highly recommend it if you haven't watched it, the Still documentary. Yeah, he's great. And his sense of humor and his family and the way they're, kind of take care of him. And it's just a wonderful story. And yeah, he's doing incredible things. It's very exciting that there's so many breakthroughs happening, even just this year, the past few months, that it's really an exciting time. If you're going to get Parkinson's,
Right.
do it.
Good. That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, let's just see here. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but oh, there she is.
Hi there. We've just had some wonderful comments. A couple of questions were asked at the beginning, which I held off on. Sorry. Because you actually answered them about the Rockettes, if in your experience, had experienced that pushback from their family. And then just a couple of comments about the thrill of learning about profiling and how interesting that was. And I'm just going to second that as well. I loved Peter's character. So yeah, just a lot of comments of love is what we've got in the chat.
Great. Yeah.
All right. I know that
yeah.
you wrote a little bit of a Keystone Cops, good cop, bad cop scene. That was something I felt was a little new for you also. Very fun to read.
That was fun, because it is such a classic thriller move, isn't it? To have cops like that. So yeah, it was that was really a fun thing to include. And just, there are a couple of things in terms of the police procedure and that kind of thing that was a real learning curve for me. And the next book does not have a thriller element. I'm going to try something different in the next one, but yeah, it was fun to do.
Before we talk about the next one, this book I feel like had the most, had more different things included in it compared to all of your other books. Did you find that to be easier or more difficult?
I'll tell you, I found keeping it more of one plot line to be so much easier. Dual timelines are a nightmare. And, because you want to make each timeline interesting, and you need to make the stories converge in a way that the reader finds very satisfying. And, braiding those together is really tough. And those are the nights that I'm usually eating a lot of chocolate and drinking wine.
Right.
So to do one plot line was really, really fun and a lot easier. But at the same time, it gave me a lot of opportunity to include just more about the characters and more about the time period, which I found really satisfying.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one so much. The cover, let's talk about the cover. The cover is a little different than the other covers that you've done. So this is the cover here, which I love. The other covers of your books have a person in it.
Yes.
So how did this?
We joked around about, do we have a woman in a hat looking backwards wistfully?
Right.
Which is the typical historical fiction cover. And yeah, for this one, it felt like a bit of a different book, right? Because it had that thriller element, that I wanted to see if we could do something without it. And that it was the art director at Dutton, a guy named Christopher Forrest, who's incredible and has done every one of my covers. He's the head guy there at Dutton. And he's just great, from the dollhouse, which was that beautiful shot of the girl in red walking across the park, to this one, he really is able to make them all feel similar in a way, even though they're very different, and this one, I just thought the colors were great. It just really worked for the story.
Yeah, I agree. All your covers are great. But yeah, this one is perfect for this story. I agree.
There's one just quick question or just comment about the audiobook. So we sometimes like to talk about the audiobook version too. And that Peg says that she really liked that you did the author's notes yourself on the audiobook.
I wrote them, but I didn't read them.
Oh, you didn't read them. Okay.
Oh, no, that's interesting. I wonder if that they got some wonderful narrators for the book, including the one who does the older Marion is the same woman who did all the Olive Kitteridge books. or Elizabeth Strout, which I thought was wonderful. And they're just terrific. And yeah, you know, I know a lot of authors are doing their notes themselves, and I would love to do that. I think that's a great idea. It's just, you know, it's incredible that the talent that's required to do an entire audiobook. I truly respect them.
Yeah, it's a whole other job, but you were an actress, you could do it.
Oh my goodness. I would want to start editing it. You know, it would be very hard for me to be like, oh, that sentence isn't quite right, you know, and try and fix it as I go along.
Right, yeah, you'd have to put on a different hat.
Yeah, and the publisher would not be happy.
And I have one more question that popped up about wondering who your favorite character was in this book to write and why.
Oh, what a good question. You know, Marion for sure. You know, she was just such a fun character to try and write. And I felt like she was I had a really hard time in the beginning. The first 3 chapters I rewrote, I'd say 3 times, because I couldn't get her started. I couldn't get her lifting off the page correctly. And I knew there was a lot to cover in those 3 chapters. There's a lot goes on. And it wasn't until I realized, oh, she should be teaching these students, these young kids, ballet, because that will show a side of herself that will hopefully be very empathetic and you know, kind of make the reader start to adore her from the beginning. And so, yeah, just the thought that I think in the very beginning, the ballet student is, you know, licking the mirror in ballet class, a little 5-year-old. And just that was what finally fixed it for me. But it was tough to get her going for some reason. And then once that was fixed, it all the rest fell into place.
I took ballet when I was 5 years old. I don't know if I was licking the mirror, but I definitely was not a ballerina quite yet.
No. Oh my goodness.
What is this next project? You mentioned that you have a new project. What is your next project?
Yeah, so the next book is set at the Met Museum. And that takes place in the 1970s and also the 1930s, but more in the 70s. And it's from the point of view of a curator in the Egyptian wing who has to track down a missing artifact. And then it also is from the point of view of an assistant for the Met Gala, which at that time was under Diana Vreeland, who was a real larger than life character. And so you've got some glamour, you've got some mummies, and we'll see where it goes. It's really fun to work on.
It sounds great. We love art, so that'll be a great one.
Yeah, and of course I had to go to Egypt for research in April. So that was an amazing 10 days that we went and took a boat down the Nile and just saw it was just incredible. It was really fun to try and capture, you know, that when you've been there. And I knew
that's a nice perk because everything has always been in New York for you. So this is like something special to get to go to Egypt for research.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I think, you know, I'd be happy to do a book that's based in a building in London, maybe down the road. We'll see, because that could be really fun to have to go away for a month. And, you know, I think it's all a tax write-off, right?
Totally. All right. So that's interesting. So you do have the idea that maybe you would go away from New York at some point for a story.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I always joke around that by the 30th book, I'll be doing the gas station on the corner of 11th Avenue or something.
Right. And I'm sure there's some good stories for them too.
Yeah, we'll make it work. But we'll see. You know, there's so many buildings here in New York. You could be here for, you know, ages, but yeah, it might be fun to try a different country. We'll see.
And do you think you'll ever write a book that doesn't have a basis in a building?
Not if my publishers have any say in it.
They're on a roll. They like this.
They like what works.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And so, yeah, we have a 2-book deal. So the next 2 books are definitely that. And yeah, and then who knows, you know, it's fun to play around with mystery, with thriller, with, you know, there's so many different aspects to a book to explore. And I feel like over the years, I've grown as a writer. I'm learning new things all the time. And so it's just, you know, a lot of fun to approach each new book with a really fresh brain and not feel like it has to repeat the same thing.
Yeah. Do you think that your boyfriend influenced you to include the thriller aspect?
No, I would say it made me less worried about doing it. knowing
Right.
I had an expert, in the next room if I needed it.
Right.
And so, yeah, he writes under the name E.G. Scott. He writes with a friend of his. He's the G of E.G. Scott. And yeah, because there's always thrillers lying around the apartment these days, there's such great reads, and a good thriller is, Stacey Willingham is a writer of thrillers who's just terrific and writes these real beautiful literary books that are also just unputdownable and surprising and have great plot twists and have huge stakes. So yeah, I would do another one, sure.
That's good. It's fun. I like that. Okay. I know you're part of the Thursday authors. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. During COVID, there were a few of us who we would Zoom every Thursday at 5 over a glass of wine, and kind of some had books coming out within a month, and we were trying to figure out how to help them get a book out during COVID when you can't go out and see readers. And some of us were working on books, and so we really just kind of pulled together, and we've just kind of bonded ever since. And it's Jamie Brenner, Amy Popel, Linda Cohen-Leugman, Susie Orman Schnall, Nicola
Those are
Harris.
three names.
Yeah, all these folks. And it's just a wonderful, warm group. It's surprising when you're older to have all new great friends, because you're usually people you've known from college or high school. And so to have this whole new group of friends who are people who came to writing later in life and are kind of finding their way, it's just a remarkable group.
It's so nice. I mean, I know most of them as well, and it's a nice nice camaraderie to have, with people that are doing the same thing as you. Everyone's individual, but you all help each other, and it's a nice support.
It is. And I can't have to do a shout out to one of us is not an author. That's Susie Leopold, who's a bookstagrammer and
She's a fellow blogger of mine.
Fellow blogger and an influencer, as they say. So yeah, it's really fun.
Good. That's so nice. And you guys are doing something, you have an event.
Yeah, we're doing an event. I think it's October 26th in New York. If you go to my events page, there's a lot going on for me over the through the summer, through the fall. So if you go onto my website, Fiona Davis Books, on the events page, if I'm coming to a place near you, please come. It's so much fun to meet readers and talk about these things.
Nice. Okay. What have you read lately that you recommend? That's always a good question. I like to hear.
That's a good question. If you like Jane Austen, there's this book called A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Searle, I believe is her name. And it's a take on Jane Austen and Agatha Christie. It's so funny. You will be laughing every page. But it's just wonderful about it. It's hard to explain, but it's a very modern take on Jane Austen.
Okay, Most Agreeable Murder.
Most Agreeable Murder. It's just so good. So that's been a really fun one. And I'm really looking forward to reading Anne Patchett's new book. Of course, she's amazing. And then, I love Geraldine Brooks. So Horse was a huge favorite. Who else? The man who wrote Trust, Hernan Diaz. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting book because it's Gilded Age, but it's kind of a different approach to it. And a brilliant structure, that book. And I think that won the Pulitzer Prize. It's really, really good.
Okay, I have all of those books, so
you gotta start reading.
I just finished The Covenant of Water today.
Oh, how was it? I haven't read it.
It's so fantastic, but it's like 700 and something pages, so it's a big investment on time and concentration, and characters and everything. It's a lot, but it was great.
I love it. Yeah, it's gotten such great reviews. It's supposed to be fantastic.
Yeah, it was really great. So I know that as a former actress, you enjoy the theater. And so I would be remiss if I did not ask you what you have seen lately that you loved and what you would recommend for Broadway, off-Broadway, New York shows.
Yeah, the things I've seen were have closed, like King James was fantastic. The things that are coming up that I'm excited about are Prayer for a French Republic, which is at MTC, which is I'm really interested. That was off Broadway and is coming back to Broadway. I think sometime early next year. A good friend of mine is in the Neil Diamond musical, so I highly I'm pushing that. It's so much fun. It's really great. And she's amazing. She's not a musical dancer or singer. She's more of a straight actor. And she plays his therapist. And it kind of is the structure that the whole thing is around. And it's so good. And it turns out Neil Diamond stopped singing because of Parkinson's. And so there's this weird convergence of things going on, but it's so much fun. Yeah. What have you seen that you've liked? What's been your top?
Well, the last thing I saw was Summer 1976.
Wasn't that great? Yes, I saw that.
It was fantastic. I was
Really?
surprised at how much I loved it. And I actually brought my 20-year-old son with me, and he loved it too, which is unusual because, it was not,
Yeah.
focused on his kind of thing.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but I thought it was great. Jessica Hecht, I love. And Laura Linney is tried and true all the time. We just honored her at the Westport Library. We had an event honoring Laura Linney, and we had her there, and she was interviewed by Lynn Meadow, who is you know who she is. She runs the theater. And Benjamin Brantley was there and gave a speech.
Wow.
And we had Donald Margulies there. And John Benjamin Hickey was there, fellow.
Sorry, as we theater geek out, sorry.
Yeah, it was
great,
like
though.
so much amazing talent in the room. Very exciting.
Yeah.
Very exciting and fun.
Oh.
So Laura Linney, I went to see the show because of her, because we were having her, but I saw Jessica Hecht in Letters from Max. And that was at the Signature Theater, which Louisa actually works there. So we saw that together.
Another great theater in New York City, for sure.
Yeah, very, very nice theater. And Jessica Hecht is really, I find her to be very special and a different kind of actress. I just can't stop listening to her speak, the way that she speaks. It's just mesmerizing.
Yes. And for anyone who doesn't know, Jessica Hecht was Ross's ex-wife on Friends.
That's right. That's right.
But she's also theater royalty, for sure.
And then coming up, I want to see Here Lies Love. Of course, it's a huge dance party, and I feel like we should get group tickets and all go together, because that show is going to be so much fun. I know. David
Byrne, yeah, with the music. Yep.
Yeah. But Louisa's really the theater expert. So if you want to pop in, Louisa, and say.
I also loved King James so very much. Okay. And I loved Primary Trust. Did you see Primary Trust?
No.
It was off Broadway. Beautiful play. Those were my two sort of favorites recently.
Yeah, we have to support theater. It's struggling.
100%.
Well, lots of opportunity to see theater and lots of ways to see it.
Oh, Amy saying Barry Manilow's Harmony was exceptional, and I'm going to second that. And that is coming to Broadway. So, because I saw it off Broadway. Did you see it on Broadway, Amy? Okay, because did it just start?
I saw it in the Yiddish Theater in last May, but it's coming this fall. That's right. We have to support it, because these things close if not enough people go. And a lot of people would be like, "Oh, it's Barry Manilow," and no, it's not schmaltzy. It was, the harmonies were tight and unbelievable, but the story was housed in World War II with a real historical fiction bent with an actual group that was called what was it? They were called the Harmonistas. The something harmony, the musical Harmonistas. Yeah. And it was a really so talented and so well done. I was moved and blown away all at once. So I highly recommend that, and we have to support it, as you guys know. So these things get close.
He actually promoted that in the Barry Manilow concert at Radio City, and they had the cast come out and they did a number from the show during the concert. So
look how all this is coming in a full circle. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is, right? But the theater is so great. There's so much to see, and And it's easy to get tickets too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no reason not to go. It's better than the movies. All right, well, I think if anyone has any other comments or questions, now's the time.
I just had a question. When you were talking about the new book that's going to be centered on the Met, does it happen to have a name yet that we can?
No, it doesn't. I'm really bad at names. And so I have to leave it up to my editor and my agent to come up with it. Because the name of each book has to do with not only the building, but also the plot. And so like the masterpiece for Grand Central set at an art school, or the Lions of Fifth Avenue. And then there's a family called the Lions inside the library. And so finding that double meaning is always very hard. So I've been running through some in my head, but they're all terrible. I'm really bad at it. So if anyone has any ideas,
I
please
happen to think The Spectacular was a great title for
Thank
this particular book. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my editor and agent came up with that. Yep. Yeah, I just call it the Met book or the Radio City book until it's time.
It's a shame that your agent doesn't get any kudos. You know, like this is your book and your name is on it, and the agent came up with it, but that's all right. Everyone just,
Whatever book titled by, so and so. They are saying that some of the publishing companies want to do credits of, things like the art director, the publicity person, the marketing person, to start putting those credits in the front of a book. And I think that's such a good idea, because you can thank them all in the acknowledgements, but not everybody reads them. And these are people who are crucial to the process. It's such a team effort. And I have to say, a lot of these people are women. It's a really strong female team who puts out a book like The Spectacular. And, we start way out in terms of talking about publicity and marketing and covers. And so,
I think that's a great idea. Also for other authors, aspiring authors that want to know, who they might reach out to work with, it's great for business.
Yeah.
For everybody, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, I think we've covered just about everything.
I think we have. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. This was just incredible. And thanks for the opportunity, Jen and Lisa. This is just such a delight. I can't tell you.
Of course. It's so great to see you. I think the last time I saw you was in Greenwich, talking about Magnolia Palace with Deborah Royce.
Yes. That was wonderful. Yeah. She's incredible too. That's the thing, that the community is so supportive. The author community in New York and outside of New York is just wonderful, of people promoting each other's books and doing everything they can. And Deborah's just one example of that.
She's so great. And she's also was an actress. So that was probably fun for you to connect with, but she knows so much history and very interesting person, aside from being an author. So that was a great conversation. That was fun.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to keep on doing it. I think that's what we're going to have to do.
We're going to keep doing it.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you and great to hear about The Spectacular, and everyone recommend it to their friends. It's great. We all loved it and we can't wait for the next one.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Fiona.
Thanks. Take care.
And thank you, Jen, for another great discussion.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah. All right. So this officially ends the session. I'll stop the recording.